Hello dolphins and welcome to the first flip notes. The first flip notes will be on soil. Remember, as you're going through these flip notes, you can pause, you can rewind, and you can replay. And if you have any questions, write them down to the side so that when we actually talk about it in class, you can ask those questions at any time. The first thing that we're going to talk about is the objectives. While you are watching this video, there are a few things that we are going to be learning. We will identify what soil consists of, meaning its composition, what it's made of. We will describe how climate and landforms affect soil's characteristics. We will also describe the activities of organisms and how they affect the soil's characteristics. We will then explain how the properties of soil differ from one point to the other, and we'll explain why is it important to learn about soil. The first slide that we have is on the composition or the ingredients of soil. There are 5 ingredients for soil. Weathered rock particles, which is the main ingredient. The second ingredient is water. The third is air. The fourth is minerals, for example, iron. Iron actually makes soil look a reddish color. It's also what causes rust. So whenever you see that reddish color, you can automatically know that it probably has iron in it. And the last thing is your organic matter, also known as humus. This humus is composed of twigs, leaves, and decomposing organisms. A soil's composition, also what it's made of, can determine 3 main things. What can you grow on it? What can you build on it? And what happens when rainwater falls on it? So for example, if we were to compare desert and grassland, what you can grow in it. Well, obviously we know that in a desert we have a lot of sand. So are you going to grow a lot of grasses and large trees and shrubs? No, you'll probably grow things that are date trees and cactus, things like that. Whereas in a grassland, you'll have things that are like grass or small shrubs, but not large trees. That's because of the type of soil that it is made of. Sand is mostly made of rock, which is not weathered very well. Grassland has a lot of silt, which is very thick in nutrients. Now, what about what you can build on it? In the desert, can you build a house out of wood? No, because it's hot and dry. Therefore, it could possibly catch on fire. You don't want that to happen. So, in the desert, mostly it's made out of bricks. Whereas in the grassland, you can definitely use bricks, but you can also use wood. So therefore, you can build things that are of different types of materials depending on the type of soils that you have. Now, what happens when rainwater falls on it? In the desert, the sand is very porous. That means it has a lot of space. Therefore, it does not absorb the water well and it sinks right through. Whereas in a grassland, it's made mostly of silt. So since it's made of silt, the water is absorbed tremendously. On this slide, we're going to be learning about the kind of soil that forms in an area depends on 6 main things. The kind of rock, the area's climate, the landforms, the plants, the animals and other organisms that are in the soil, as well as time. On the next slide, you'll actually learn a little bit more information about each one of these. Let's start off with climate and how climate affects soil. Different types of soil form in different climates. So let's start with the tropical rainforest. The tropical rainforest has a hot and wet climate. Therefore, the heavy rains wash away minerals and thin layers of humus. Therefore, you're going to have a really thin A, which is not very suitable for crops. The desert, on the other hand, has a very hot and dry climate. Since it has a hot and dry climate, you have a shallow A horizon that contains very little organic matter. The low rainfall means that the formation of the soil is going to occur very slowly. The temperate forest is warm and wet, which is great because that means that the moderate rainfall will allow for a thick A, which is dark in color and means rich in organic material, which is really good for growing crops. The last one that we're going to talk about is the Arctic. The Arctic is extremely cold and it's extremely dry. And for this reason, it's going to be very poorly developed, meaning that you're going to get a lot of rocks. You're going to get some soil, but it's going to be extremely minimal. So you'll have more rocks than you will, or rock fragment than you will soil. Moving on to landforms. For example, with a landform, depends on the type of landforms that you have. For example, if you have a mountain versus a valley, the mountain has cold climates, meaning that you're going to have slower formation of soil. But think about it. A mountain is high and it has a steep hill. So what's going to happen? Whenever it rains, the soil that was created eventually is just going to wash down the mountainside and into the valley. Therefore, the mountain itself is going to have a really thin A. Therefore, you're not going to get a lot of plants because of the fact that the soil is very thin. Now, if you move down to the valley has an extremely thick A. And why is that? It's because all of the soil that was on top of the mountain got washed down into the valley. So therefore, the A is going to be extremely thick and full of nutrients. In addition to that, you're going to get lots of different types of plants that you're not going to get, for example, on top of a mountain. Alright guys, in the last two slides we learned about how the abiotic factors affected soil. Climate and landforms are abiotic, they're not living. Now we're going to talk about the biotic factors that affect soil. There are three main biotic or living factors that affect the soil. They are plants, microorganisms, and animals. Plants provide most of the organic matter or humus. Now, how do they do that? When they lose their leaves or they die, they start to decompose. Therefore, the leaves, the twigs, and anything that falls on the ground from the plant becomes the organic matter or the humus. Microorganisms. Microorganisms are your decomposers. They decompose the dead plants and animals and they provide nutrients back to the soil. This is extremely important. So, microorganisms decompose dead plants and animals, return nutrients to the soil. Animals, on the other hand, add air and improve soil's ability to absorb water. So, what do these animals do? These animals actually loosen and mix the soil. How do they do it? They dig tunnels. So, for example, your worms, as they're digging through it, they're adding holes so that water can get in and also air. Here you see a great picture of how living organisms affect the soil. Here you see this is an animal that is burrowing in the ground, adding hole so that air and water can get into the soil. You also have lots of microbes or microorganisms. These are what are decomposing the dead plants and the animals. And then up here you see are plants. So here you have leaves that have fallen into the ground and you can see that these leaves are dying and decomposing. Now we're going to talk about the soil horizons or what they're made of. If you take a look to the right, there you'll see a picture. This picture is actually a soil profile. Soil profile basically means all the layers or all the horizons together. Now, we're going to actually look at each horizon one by one in this slide. Therefore, each layer is a horizon. All the layers together is a profile. Let's take a look at the first horizon. The first horizon is the O horizon. This is the organic layer. This is also where you basically find your humus. Do you guys remember what humus is? It's basically the decomposing of plants and animals and twigs. And that's basically what the O horizon is. Let's take a look at the A horizon. The A horizon is the topsoil layer. It contains humus mixed with mineral particles. Therefore, it's going to be the darkest in color and it has the most nutrients. This layer is great for plants, especially for farm plants such as potatoes and corn and all kinds of other plants. Now, the next horizon is the B horizon. This has very little organic material. It contains clay and minerals that are washed down from the A horizon, and it's brownish or reddish in color because of the amount of iron that it has in it. Now, the B horizon, since it does not have very many nutrients, it does have an important goal or important part. The important thing that the B does is it holds down the roots. Without the B, we don't have anything to hold down the roots, which supports the plants. Therefore, the B is what supports the roots of the plant. The C horizon is the deepest layer of soil. It contains the largest and least weathered rock particles. It's normally light brown to yellowish in color. And since it's the farthest down, that's the one that basically is not weathered quite as much. The R horizon, which is also sometimes not considered a soil horizon, is basically a layer of rock, and that's why it's not considered soil, is because of the fact that it's not weathered down quite yet. In the past slides, we have now learned about the soil and what it's made of. We've also learned about how climate, landforms, animals, organisms, plants all affect the characteristic of soil. In this slide, we're going to actually talk about the properties of soil, which helps us identify different characteristics of soil. Let's start with texture. Texture is basically how the soil feels. This is really determined by the size of weathered rock particles that it contains. Sand obviously has the largest rock particles. Therefore, water will move through it very quickly. Silt, on the other hand, has a silky type of feeling, and therefore it's medium and it holds water more than sand. Clay is the smallest of all, and it absorbs water. Fertility is the ability of soil to provide plants nutrients. Therefore, if the soil is fertile, then the plants can get its nutrients. If it's not fertile, then that means you're not going to get a lot of plants that grow there. For example, in the sand, you don't get very many types of plants growing in sand because it's not very fertile. Pore space, that is the amount of space between the soil particles. If you take a look at texture, you can actually see that sand, silt, and clay has different amount of pore space. Sand has the largest pore space, silt has a medium-sized pore space, and clay has the smallest pore space. That also combines with water retention, which is the fifth one. Therefore, the soil's ability to hold water and moisture as well as pore space really go together hand in hand. The more space there is, the less water it holds. The less space there is, the more water it holds. And then, of course, chemistry. Chemistry is basically the pH level of the soil. That's how much acid is in the soil, and that affects how well the nutrients in the soil is dissolved by the water. So, if it's too acidic, what do farmers do? Basically, there's limestone, which is a type of rock. They take it, they break it down into a powder, and they pour this or they spread this on the soil so that the pH level of the soil goes down. So there are different things in which the farmer can do in order to fix the chemistry of his or her soil. This brings us to our last and final slide. Why is it important to learn about soil? Well, soil takes an extremely long time to create due to the fact that it's created from weathering rocks. Therefore, you have now learned about what it's made of, how it's made, and the properties. What I would like for you to tell me now is, why is soil so important? Write it down in your own words, and we'll talk about this tomorrow.